This was the scheduled time for our task force hearing on Senate Bill 2384. So I'm going to call our first task force meeting to order. And good afternoon to everybody. I am so glad to see you all here for our task force hearing regarding foster care and adoption. As you are aware, especially since you're on this task force and everybody has a special interest in our children in this state, and also specifically foster care and adoption. So this particular session, we passed laws, first of all, that separated DHS from CPS, but then we also did the Path to Permanency bill. The legislature this year, I'm proud to say the House and the Senate, we worked very hard on the baby drop-off box. And so this was a piece of legislation, Senate Bill 2384, that both houses for Judiciary A committees, both House and Senate, that we put a lot of time and thought into all the legislation that was passed this particular year, but we also thought that special attention needed to be paid to foster care and adoptions. So Chairman Bryce Wiggins, who is the chairman of Judiciary A in the Senate, he and I will be co-chairing the task force. And before we get to the introductions, I'd like to just get a few preliminary matters out of the way. You should have in your packet of materials an actual copy of the Senate Bill 2384. On page 3, and it would be section 5, it says that a majority of the members shall constitute a quorum for the purpose of conducting any business of the task force, and a majority vote of all members present shall be required for any recommendations to the legislature. There are 18 members that are on this task force, and so a quorum shall constitute 10 members of the task force in order to make or vote, first of all, for the purpose of conducting any business, number one, but then also a majority vote of all members shall be required for any recommendations to the legislature. Further, it says that the task force has to adopt rules and regulations governing times and places for meetings and governing the manner of conducting its business. I would suggest that and also recommend that the meetings be here at the Capitol. I think this would be a centralized location. And later, as you see on your agenda, we'll be talking about the future times for the meetings. As I stated earlier, I am delighted and happy to have you here serving on the task force. And with that said, I think this would be a perfect time. I think we all know each other, but just in case we don't, I think this would be a perfect time for us to introduce ourselves. And also, if you don't mind, state which agency or organization that you are representing. And I'll start. I'm Angela Cockerham. I serve as chair of Judiciary A. I represent House District 96, which encompasses the Mid Wilkinson, Pike, and Adams counties.
Welcome, everybody. I was going to make you senator. What
No.
Chairwoman Cockerham said, ditto. I'm Senator Bryce Wiggins. I represent Pascagoula, Ocean Springs, and Goshen, and all parts in between. Chairman of Judiciary A, and yes, this is an important task force, and as the chair people, Angela and I worked with our committee members to bring this to fruition, because at the end of the day, it's about the children that we have in the state custody. So that's who I am.
I'm Dawn Beam. I serve on the Supreme Court, and I brought with me Ashley Einberg, who is a student at Ole Miss. She's been working.
Judge, can you pull we're used to that, us legislators, and it's hard to hear. So if you're speaking, can you use the microphone?
I'm Dawn Beam. I serve on the Supreme Court, and I brought Ashley Einberg, who's a student at Ole Miss. She's been studying this statute bill, and was kind of helping
My name is Mike Dickinson. I'm Harrison County's full-time youth court judge. I'm a county court judge, but all I handle are youth court matters. And I've been doing that for 4.5 years. And before that, which is what got me into the world of child welfare, I became a foster dad. I fostered 10 kids so far, adopted one from foster care, and about to adopt a second. So.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Morgan. I'm with Office of the State Public Defender. I'm the Parent Defense Program Manager. I'm also a certified child welfare law specialist. I've been in this position for about 2 years, and before that I was a frontline parent defender in DeSoto County.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Crystal Wise Martin, and I'm a chancery judge in Hines County, Mississippi, and I've been in this position approximately 5 years.
I'm also Chancery Judge in the 6th District, which is Joey Gilport, which is Neshoba, Winston, Tala, Kemper, Carroll, and Choctaw counties. And I've been Chancery Judge 13 years.
My name is Allison McMahon. I'm an attorney here in Jackson at Foreman, Watkins, and Cruz. I was appointed to this position by the Mississippi Bar. My background is that we work at the firm on a contract basis with the Attorney General's office, specifically with Kim and her division, and handle a lot of the backlog of the TDR cases there. And then also, I am a former foster parent as well, and my husband and I adopted 3 children that were siblings sent at foster care.
Good afternoon, my name is Jenny Hines, I'm CEO of the Southern Christian Services. I'm here representing MACA, which stands for the Mississippi Association of Child Caring Agencies. We are the licensed and accredited body that works with all foster care children throughout Mississippi.
I'm Ted Booth. I'm the Executive Director of the Legislative Affairs Committee.
Hi, I'm Kim Turner. I am here as the designee of the Office of the Attorney General, standing in for Hadley Gable, who will be the normal designee. But as part of our duties, we do have a group dedicated to child protection services and child welfare. So we're very interested in this task force.
I'm Samantha Callahar. I'm the governor's appointee for lived experience, being a foster child myself. I also lead First Place for Youth programs here, one of those being Mississippi Youth Voice, which is a youth council of lived experience foster youth who make recommendations and work on policy initiatives like the Faith Scholarship, leasing laws. We actually have a full 16-page recommendation report that they've put together for you guys. And so I'm here to be a voice for those that are in the foster care system.
And good afternoon. I'm David Barton. I'm the Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Child Protection Services. I'm here sitting in for Commissioner Andrea Sanders, who unfortunately is out of the country until Friday of this week. So she sends her regards and regrets for not being here, but she will normally be present for the meetings.
Gwen Tatum, I am attorney for Chair of Judiciary Aid. And I'm also the director of the Legislative Services Office.
I'm Clint Pentecost. I'm with Baker Donaldson Law Firm here in Jackson. Serve as lead counsel on the Olivia White litigation. Support CPS through everyone.
Hi, I'm Vicki Lowry, and I serve as General Counsel of Child Protection Services.
I'm Brittany Davis. I am the Senior Policy Advisor for the Clinton County Governor's Office.
I'm Sam Martin.
We also have members of the task force that are participating remotely. And so we want to say hello to you as well. And if you don't mind, if you could introduce yourselves.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Ricky Wilder. I'm a counsel advocate for the past possibly 11 years in Harrison County and Stone.
Hey, I'm Lindsay Simmons. I am a lobbyist, but I'm on this committee because I adopted 2 children from foster care, and I've stayed pretty involved in that world since then. And I'm sorry I couldn't be there. I have to be there next time in person.
And I am David Parker. I'm a lawyer who is a civil practitioner, but I work in Wayne County
the youth court referee for Greene County, where I have served for about 18 years in that capacity.
And I'm David Calder. I'm the director of our Child Advocacy Clinic at the Ole Miss Law School.
All right, I believe that's everyone. And next, we will turn to the election of the task force secretary. And I'm going to recognize Chairman Wiggins.
Yeah, thank you, Angela. And looking at the agenda, that doesn't mean I'm secretary. So, just to make that clear. So we do need, because at the end of the day and under the bill that was passed by the legislature, we have to make a report. And so it will be very important for the secretary to record what we're doing so that working with our attorneys and peer, we can get that in place. So if we will do it like we do in our bar, which is if there's no volunteer, then we appoint somebody. So is there any volunteer who would like to be, or I'll open it up for nominations, let me put it that way, and you can nominate yourself if you would like to for secretary. Anyone? Everybody's head's looking down.
I'll volunteer Andrea and CPS.
Okay. And it can be.
That's what she gets for being in Greece.
Okay.
But I actually.
That's exact, and that's what we did. If you didn't show up, you got made the office.
No, obviously anything comes out of the task force directly impacts everything with the agency. And I'm quite confident that Vicki, even though they deserted me and sat at the back table when I turned around today, will be present at all the meetings and taking copious notes. So we will gladly do that.
Do you have any other nominations? Do I hear nominations to be closed?
So moved.
So moved, okay.
Congratulations,
Andrea is our secretary. And her assistants, I guess I should say.
Now we'll have an overview of Senate Bill 2384.
So what I have given you, the handout is simply just to make it easier, what is in the bill that we have. So for the benefit of those on Zoom, as well as anybody participating and viewing us, I'm just going to read down what we, the legislature, has charged us to do and to look at and report back. And I will state that there is quite a list here, but they're important, and hopefully we can get to them all. So perform and review any necessary revisions of statutes, review reasonable efforts and diligent search in the CPS statutes, and determine whether uniform definition is needed. And it may go without saying, but those that you see in quotes are language from the statutes that actually it probably led to some questions. Draft a definition of what constitutes compelling and extraordinary reasons for TPR and not in the best interest of the child. Draft definitions of neglect as willful or non-willful. Review the GAL role in the foster care system and the termination of parental rights process, including responsibility for payment, how much they should be paid, the need for GALs. I would like to note to the task force that the issue of GALs has been, like everything, but the GALs has been an issue in the legislature for many years. And even in the Senate, going back a few years ago, where some legislation came out, there was even a task force that actually I don't believe ended up doing anything, for lack of a better description. there's a serious issue of how GALs operate in this state, how payments, also an issue of people paying GALs. And sadly, what I have heard and the Senate has heard is that they get, let's just say it gets politicized. And we need to look at that. So I will put that to the task force. Review whether attorneys should be provided to parents and how to pay them. Review the time frame and guidelines followed once a child is in CPS custody. Review requirements and efficiency of current permanency plans. Speaking of permanency plans, I will, and I know Chairwoman Cockerham knows this because we dealt with it during the session, which was CPS and Commissioner Sanders, a lot of focus, they recommended and what we were trying to do is to move the children through the system as quickly as possible, and that's not being done. And as many of you may know, we're under the Olivia Y lawsuit. And so reviewing the permanency plans and how that can be done is important. And a number of the pieces of legislation that came out during the session were trying to accomplish that. I don't mind saying what I know about it is that there's a lot of barriers within the system, but there's necessary checks and balances. And I know from talking with Commissioner Sanders that the goal is to move them through the system, and I think that's what we're focused on with that. Review requirement and the necessity of psychological assessment for each child coming into custody. Review of the diagnostic and evaluation shelters and whether children are too long for placement. Review the course of action when a parent tests positive for drugs or alcohol, including when a mother tests positive during labor and delivery. There was, just to add some context, about 4 or 5 years ago maybe, the legislature adopted language that said that testing positive for marijuana in and of itself was not grounds to remove the children, but it could be used as probable cause. That was kind of a shift. There are different courts throughout the state see these things differently. And so I think that's why we're tasked with that. Review the current use of Title 4E funding. Review laws and policies in other states. I will note that in previous task force, we've relied on the great knowledge and assistance of our attorneys and even peer, so we can do that. And review fatherhood initiative proposals and develop proposals to increase fatherhood. That's extremely important. I don't think I need to tell people here how important it is. I will say this, that I don't think, in essence, the general public understands, and certainly from a policy standpoint in our laws, I don't think we've done enough to, to establish fatherhood as what they need to be doing. So that's why it's in here. And then any other issue related to the state foster care system, that's our catch-all. So with that, Madam Chair, just open it up to questions on those particular issues if anybody has any. Guess not.
Well, seeing none, as Chairman Wiggins just gave the overview of Senate Bill 2384, I'm certain that we all realize as he went through all of the duties from A through letter O that we have our work cut out for us. And so this will definitely be a working committee. And being that this is our first committee meeting for the task force, we wanted to get organized, but I also think that this is a good time just straight out of the gate to really just dive in. And seeing that there were no questions after Chairman Bryce's overview of Senate Bill 2384, we have asked CPS to give us a presentation this afternoon or an overview of foster care and adoptions. And if you are ready,
Yes,
I'm going to
Can I
ask.
mention one thing? I'm sorry.
Sure.
On that. I'm sure the question will come up, so I'll go ahead and bring it up, that this bill is authorized for 1 year. There's a lot to do. In other task force, people have asked, well, what happens if we don't get to all of them? Let me say, we're going to try to get to all of them. However, if the feeling is that it needs to continue, then the legislature could come back in January and re-establish the task force.
If both chambers agree.
Correct. That's right.
If both chambers agree that it needs to be reconstituted. So it's no time like the present. Chairman Bryce is right that we could come back and reauthorize, but it takes both houses to do that. And so I would just recommend that we use our time as efficiently and wisely as possible. And so with that, Deputy Commissioner Blanton, if you are ready, and also Ms. Lowry and Mr. Pentecost, if you don't mind just presenting on the south end of
I
the
think I should
table.
make them come up to the front table. What do y'all think? But
Well, yes, it would be helpful probably if you present it down at the end
okay.
so that everyone gets to see you.
While they're getting set up, I have a question. Subsection 12 indicates this task force is dissolved December the 1st of 2023. Is it extended out to July? Did you say it was a year?
Well, I said a year. The question was, it dissolves December 1st. I said a year, but it's December 1st.
The report is due on December 1st. There is a report of any recommendations that this task force makes. The report is due on December the 1st. And so we will, after this presentation, talk about meeting dates and times. And you also have before you a list of subcommittees that we'll talk about after this particular presentation from CPS. But yes, there is a report of any findings, any recommendations. And so there's a lot to accomplish by November.
And I guess, I'm sorry, I didn't pick. This is July. We're in July. So really, we got 4 months, 5 months. So I said a year. I was thinking back to January or whatever. It's 5 months.
Deputy Director Blanton, when you're ready, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, Mr. Chairman, and we appreciate the opportunity to come and present to the committee today. I feel like I'm way down here by myself. That's okay. As I said before, my name is David Barton. I'm the Deputy Commissioner. Vicki Lowry is our General Counsel at CPS, and most of you are familiar with Clint Pentecost, who's our primary attorney, Blake Donaldson, on the legal laws. And obviously, we'll talk a little bit about that as well as part of this, because it certainly plays into the equation. Not to insult anyone's intelligence, but I think it's important on the front end to as we lay the groundwork of really what is foster care and adoption about. Looking at federal law, Children's Bureau, Department of Health and Human Services, and state law as it pulls together. Bottom line, when you look at the work we do, it boils down to parents have the fundamental right to raise their own children. Foster care is a temporary solution for children whose parents can't adequately do that. Whether that's because of additional needs or whatever the case, but it is meant to be a temporary mechanism for children's parents who can't provide adequate care. Foster care ends, of course, when a parent can get the child back, which is reunification, or a relative, guardian, or adoptive family agree to raise the child, just as we have several with lived experiences here who are adoptive parents in the room. Reunification and custody with a relative are a preferred option over a non-relative. That follows straight down from federal law right down, and family is the best place. But there are times, obviously, when reunification is unsuccessful. or that it's not in the best interest of the child. And if other family members are unable to care for those children, adoption becomes the path at that point. And ideally, we start with those foster parents that have had that child, and then out from there. So again, not to insult anyone's intelligence, but to lay, this is what we're talking about here with foster care and adoption. And the state entity, the state's involvement in it is meant to be temporary in nature till we can get them to their forever home. I think it's important for everybody to sort of just to lay the groundwork of what is the volume of work that we're talking about. Because, coming from outside the agency a few years ago, you don't really realize, right, the volume of capacity that comes through. Currently, MDCPS has 3,711 children in custody and foster care. That's up slightly from the last quarter, which usually occurs in the May-June timeframe. It seems to be a regular occurrence when you watch the cyclical rates across the year. So 3,711 in custody today. Total unique children that's been in custody state physical year 23. So July 1 of last year through June 30th of this year, 5,925 children were in custody of the state at some point for at least a day during that period, during that year. So that's the folks that are actually in foster care. There's another body of work and children that fall in in-home cases. And this one is surprising to a lot of people, I think. We currently have 1,416 cases where we're working with families, parents and children in their home. Those 1,416 cases are comprised by 3,127 children. We track that a little bit differently because, technically for the Olivia Wilde lawsuit, it's only tracked by case when you're looking at an in-home case. But every one of those is child, and we feel like we have to, because what is required to meet the needs of that child are different for each child within that home. So it definitely is different there. So today, 3,711 in custody, another 3,127 that we're working with some type of wraparound services in their home. On top of that, we have investigations.
I'm sorry, can I question? Is that separate numbers, or is there any overlap between those two numbers?
No, sir, there's no overlap between those.
So there's approximately a total of 6,800 children that you're got some kind of open file on, I'll put it that way.
Yes, sir, and actually a third group that would constitute that open file is on. These we haven't opened an in-home case or a foster care case yet, but we've received a hotline call or something has triggered an investigation. We currently have 2,068 open investigations. So, Mr. Chairman, add 2,068 to those other two numbers there, if that's the number of children that the agency has some interaction with them and their families today, right now, today. The number of investigations is somewhat cyclical, just like the number of children in custody. Just to give you an idea, the agency conducts just over 26,000 investigations last state fiscal year. That cycle tends to run. We get an uptick. We're about to get an uptick next month when really it'll start earlier because many more schools are going back to are starting earlier this year with year-round school. Some started this week. But usually in that August timeframe, that number of investigations ticks up. Why? Because they're back in front of mandated reporters and teachers who haven't seen those children since last May, which is also the time that it ticks up is in May, right before the summer break begins. We get an influx of reports where they may have, teachers are obviously mandated reporters, and they feel before those children go home for the summer that just something hadn't felt right, so that starts an investigation. So how do we get those investigations started? Everybody here knows that we have it's actually in legislation, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. There is a call center that takes those calls and electronically as well. You can submit via an electronic submission to the hotline as well. On average, any given month, about 2,400 calls comes into that hotline. Again, those peak periods spike up, but when you average across the year, 2,400 to 2,500 calls a month come into the agency. Currently, the agency screens in, meaning those move to investigation on 79%, roughly 80% of those calls. The national average for screen in is closer to 50%. So that's obviously a huge amount of workload that occurs there, and something that I think we can talk as we move forward with this task force too, because there's some things the agency's trying to do. And all too often is okay, well, that's great if we're screening in more than the national average, except for we have a set number, or we have just there's a body of employees to do that work, no matter if we're screening in 50% or 80%. This is the body of employees that are doing that work. And if we're screening in things that we shouldn't, or that are more likely than not going to lead to an unsubstantiation, that's requiring a tremendous amount of work hours that could potentially be focused to those more critically in need. So it's definitely something that we want to address, and we're actually moving forward. We have a contract and structured decision-making model that about 28 states already use, and it puts evidence-based programs in place that will help with that screening. The problem is it takes close to a year for them to norm that model and actually get it in place, but there are some things we're doing in the interim to advance that.
If you don't mind, could you give a little bit more detail about the screen-in process?
Yes, ma'am. When a call is received, at the hotline, there's some very basic information gathered at that point. And if it's okay, I'm going to tell you how it's done right now and how we're actually flipping this a little bit and making it a little bit deeper process in the coming 60 days. But that call comes in, a basic amount of information is taken, and then based upon that information, currently that call center forwards that information to the county from which it would originate, and a screener there looks at the information and determines whether there's sufficient information to screen that case in or screen it out. Screening in meaning, okay, there's something here that we need to go out and take a look at. Screening out, and you can tell by those numbers, 80% are screened in. It has to be pretty evident right now, just on the face, that when something is screened out. Often that occurs when it's obvious that the reporter, based upon how they've reported and what they've said, the reporter is, it's a domestic family issue. That happens very frequently, where grandma reports on kids, ex-husband's girlfriend reports on mama, vice versa, and some of that you can read into and get screened out. As we move forward, the intent is, or not the intent, what we are doing is instead of that going out to the 82 counties, we've identified 14 individuals that will receive specific screening training. They're senior supervisors already within the agency. And all screening decisions will go to those folks, so that screening will become standardized. The problem, I won't say the problem currently is, and somewhat human nature, 82 people are doing the screening. There's 82 different ways of doing that sometimes. And, we all know how it is in some areas. Well, I know so-and-so. There's no way they would do something like that, right? Well, unfortunately, some so-and-sos do actually do some of those things. And a lot of the judiciary nodding their head over here. See that regularly, right? That folks we would not believe. So what we're doing is we're centralizing that screening decision so that we can more normalize that. That will be even more normalized as we move to this structured decision-making model, which actually will take in, this model pulls data from past years. They go back about 5 years, and they look at all the data of calls received, investigations undertaken, completed, and the results from those investigations, and actually go back and network it basically with the information that's provided on that front-end call. And using that evidence-based algorithms across time that, okay, based upon the information presented, this call, more likely than not, would have been unsubstantiated anyway, so therefore it could potentially move to the screen out. So a little bit more, not a little bit, a lot more in depth on screening as we move forward and get that process underway. But back to currently, right now today, it goes to those counties, it gets screened in or out. If screened in, that supervisor assigns it to an investigator who, based upon the nature of the allegation, has a tiered response, immediate for some very specific things such as sexual assaults and those sorts of things. Within 24 hours, if there's an estimated need, and then within 48, so you've got a little bit of time to initiate those investigations. So that's how it transpires now. Then that investigation, the timeline is 30 days to complete that investigation. And currently, that is the only, when a case is screened in, that is the only option the agency has. And that is agency policy. I think there's room already in legislation to allow what some states refer to as an alternative or differential response. And I think that's something that the committee or the task force certainly will get into more as we move forward, because that investigation is very invasive. Judiciary folks are aware of that. Foster parents have seen how that can be. I mean, it is a lot to go knock on somebody's door and start asking, some pretty serious questions about their child. But not only that, we have to corroborate those with, so we talk to their neighbors and their teachers and the school, and very invasive process. Many states have also implemented that alternative or differential response, and a direction that the agency would like to go, where that initial, depending upon how it's evaluated, and this would be in structured decision-making, where that initial look is more of an assessment than an investigation. that might apply. A good, for example, is we get a lot of calls on truancy, right? Well, that's educational neglect is what a lot of people classify truancy as. Well, the Department of Education has truancy officers, and they already look in and address some of these things. The schools themselves have some methodologies that they implement. And sometimes when we get out there and conduct a full-blown investigation, it actually, the parent just flat is not putting their kid in school, right? That is educational neglect. Sometimes we find out that it's a lack of transportation, or it's a language barrier, or in some areas, let's be honest, they just don't know how to parent, right? I mean, what they need is somebody to wrap around them and somebody to teach, especially at some of these young ages that some folks, some of the children that come in contact with us, their parents, they don't know how to parent. They don't, it wasn't long since they were skipping school, right, themselves, and, so it's not that important in that point in life. Well, that is different than somebody who willfully just is not providing education to their child. The same plays in sometimes where we get an allegation that a child is come to school dirty, unkept, right? And that may be that they're neglected, or it may be that that's the best clothes they have, right? And that was all that the parent could do. And rather than a full-blown investigation and potentially removing those children, or at risk of removing those children, maybe what they need is somebody to wrap around and make sure they know what all benefits are already available out there for them, such as SNAP benefits, TANF benefits, community services, block grants. In most cases like that, they would qualify for Medicaid, but many haven't applied, right? So there's a lot of different things to look at there that I think, again, we can talk about as the task force and certainly directions the agency wants to move forward with, because that could be huge in turning this into as it should be. The Mississippi Department of Child Protection Services should be a helping agency, not an agency that's feared. And all too often, that is the mantra that is made of the agency. Those are the people that come take your children. And while, yes, that is part of the role when that's necessary, we really want to change that viewpoint. That's the agency that come and help me keep my children if it was at all possible. And that's a different way of looking at it than maybe possibly, well, historically, that's a different way of looking at it than in the last probably 10 years of looking this way that has been historically in Mississippi and across the whole nation, is looking at it more of a helping agency. So,
Can I stop real quick and ask a question? First, I just want to applaud you. I think it's just absolutely incredible that you guys are taking the time to standardize the screening process. I think it'll just make a tremendous difference in your workload and care.
Pardon me. If you don't mind, could you please use your mic? Thank you.
The question I had was, I know you said it could take up to a year to implement this process. Does that agency have like a strategic plan on when they hope that this process will be ultimately implemented, the process being the standardized screening?
yes, the full structured decision-making product, right now, the projected delivery date is June of 2024. So we're just shy of a year from that. And that coincides with the go-live date for our new case management system, Pathways as well. I think we've touted to everybody who could possibly listen and secured the funding to do and move forward. And we are almost a year into a replacement build of our case management system, which is about 23 years old currently. Completely different platform when we do this. And we tied the evident change structured decision-making model to coincide with that go live. So that's the full-blown version of it. What we're doing with this smaller group of 14 folks that's going to, that we're going to specifically train and focus them on streaming is we're using the same basic tools that are present in that structured decision making. What we don't have is it won't automatically spit out a 20% chance that this is whatever because you don't have the data behind it yet. So we're going to use the same type of tool, the same question flow to drive that streaming. And that will be, the group of 14 are convened today and they're starting training actually today. The expectation is that they will begin training no later than the middle of August. We will flip that switch and that's when training decisions will go. We'll leave the county specific and come. And all that really means is they're going to follow that process down to something that should produce a better decision. And the biggest piece of it is then when it goes out to that county office, there is none of the, well, I know so-and-so, they would never do that. If the strainers say strain in, it gets investigated. It may come back unsubstantiated, and that's fantastic. In fact, that will give us even more data as we norm the big tool when it rolls out. Yes, ma'am. Let's see here. An idea, those children in custody, 3,711 currently in foster care. 1,995 of those currently have a plan of reunification. Which is great. I mean, 2/3 basically, the current plan is to try to reunify with their family or with immediate kin there. So 1,066 of those have a plan of adoption. I think everybody here probably knows, but just to throw it out there, that requires to change a permanency plan to adoption does require a court action. A youth court judge issues an order that sets that permanency plan. When we take a child into custody, most of the time, short of some specific exceptions and aggravated circumstances, that plan usually starts with reunification because that's the first thing it wants to attempt. And then over a period of time, when those vital parents either fail to engage or fail to make progress on moving that plan forward, that plan would ultimately get changed to adoption in those cases. And that's 1,066 that we currently have with a plan of adoption. To follow that down just a little bit, out of that 1,066 that have a plan for adoption, 375 are currently free for adoption, meaning that there has already been a TPR action, so they have been to court and that decision has been made. 95 of that 375 currently have no adoption placement identified. So the good news there is the other 280 are in an adoption placement and we're merely waiting on time in that placement before it goes to the actual adoption itself. In foster care, we have 1,589 foster homes currently licensed. That number fluctuates every single day with people coming in and out. We average, currently licensing about 25 to 30 youth foster homes per month. And that number, unfortunately, has stayed fairly static at around that 1,500 mark, meaning we have as many closed in a month as we have new licensed in a month.
May I ask a question? Are those foster homes the CPS homes, or is that also private agency?
That number would include non-therapeutic
Okay.
private agency homes as well.
Deputy Director Blanton, if you don't mind, could you just go through the licensing process?
I will try. When someone presents as interested in becoming a foster parent, when I say presents, that is, we have a team that is out actively recruiting at various community events, churches, faith-based organizations, secular organizations. Anybody that will listen to us now at this point, to where we can explain what being a foster parent means. There's an application process, obviously, that they go through. Background checks are required. Drug screen is part of that. If we go past that piece, then there's a home study conducted. Some of those home studies are conducted by our licensure team. We actually subcontract some of those out. Right now, about 50-50. But they're conducted by someone who's at least licensed at the master's level of social work, and they use a specific model for licensing those foster homes. So whether it is the contractor doing it or one of our state employees, the same process is followed in the same model. So that process goes through, and that is for those, the several that said they were foster parents in the past, right? I will tell you, my home is 5 years old now, and as it sits currently, I couldn't get licensed as a non-resident foster home without doing some things, right? It is pretty stringent, right? And a little bit of caveat of that is one of the areas that I think that the committee, certainly the team task force talked about, an area the agency wants to investigate further, is some non-safety, defining some non-safety waivers for kinship placements, right? Because there are some very stringent, guidelines within the current for a non-relative placement. Like you have, bedroom, numbers of bedrooms versus numbers of children and that sort of thing. But if grandma's got this child and grandma's the kinfolk that's raising most of them and knows them, the fact that they're sharing a bedroom, is that really a safety risk? Depends, right? I mean, there's some things that include there. So home studies conducted, then they get licensed. I will, to be brutally honest, at that point, once they're licensed, they go on to the list of licensed entities, and at times where the agency is with seeking placements, is if you're licensed and you have room in your home, a child comes into custody, you're getting a call, right? Where we want to get to is better identifying those placements, right? Where we place that child in a better fit in their community, in their school district, if possible, that sort of thing. Brutally honest, where the agency is right now is we need a place for that child to sleep tonight in many cases, right? And that means that those children are moved many times, not only out of their school district, but out of their community, their county, and even to a different part of the state. It's where there's 2 or 3 hours difference. So that home's licensed, they get a child, or whether they get a child or not, they have a license, they have a licensure worker that continues to work with them. continues to do monthly visits of that home to ensure that they maintain their status, whether a child is present or not. And they go through it annually, a recertification as a foster home. So that's very generally the process of licensure. It takes from application until licensing. The standards in the Olivia Wild lawsuit is 120 days from application to licensure, 90 days if it's expedited, which in most cases are kinship or fictive kin, such as extended family members or Sunday school teacher or something like that. No teachers would know that child. We've got 90 days to do expedited, 120 days to do normal. We do pretty good as an agency on meeting those time limits. In fact, that's one of the areas of, even under the onerous elements of the second modified settlement agreements, that's an area that we regularly did meet. But we don't have enough homes. We're meeting the timeline, we're just not, we don't have enough homes. And we've really, probably in the last 90 days, Justice Meeker, she's been very much involved with some efforts that we're doing in South Mississippi, as have some others. But we have a huge push on boosting that tool of applicants and really sharing. Many of you probably have seen the billboards around the state, for the super parents wanting just got to drive more interest. And, it's a big ask. I tell folks all the time, I was talking to some before we began here, I'm blessed, my kids are, my baby's 23 years old, so all mine are grown and gone. But, taking care of my own kids sometimes is a little bit of a challenge for me, but asking someone to take care of a child on a temporary basis that, oh, by the way, has, in most cases, well, all cases, trauma, many or most cases, significant trauma, is a huge ask, and definitely something we want to make sure that we properly portray as we're going through that recruitment process. Did that sort of explain it?
It did, yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
We have a metric in the lawsuit that's required. It is new homes licensed each year. We've got about 1,500 right now. If we got somewhere in the 1,800 to 2,000 range of licensed foster home availability, it could be game changing for the state because it would result in the ability to better place some of those kids. And to a degree, it's hard to put a firm number on it because it also depends upon the area of the state. There are certain areas of the state that have more children in custody and needing placements. And a lot of times, those are the areas that we have the least number of available homes. Right? Sometimes for some of the same reasons that child came into custody, that many of the others in that local community or area may suffer from some of the same poverty-related issues.
Can I ask a quick question? So you said those were the CPS directly licensed, but not the agency licensed homes, correct? So none of the
1589 is the total licensed homes.
okay, including the private. Okay.
Let's see, I'm skipping around on my notes here, but I want to make sure we talk a little bit about all of it. Foster care subsidies, or board payments rather, we are mandated by the second MSA, but it's just right thing to do. More so, every 2 years, we have to adjust those foster care payments rates based upon inflation. This coming year will be the next change. The last change occurred in February of 22. So in the spring of 24 will be the next time that will be adjusted. In the spring of 22, that was just shy of a 5% inflation rate. And we use the state economist, gives us the calculations based upon the previous year, what it has been, and that's how we elevate those rates. So that will be coming up again this next year. And those rates, range, I've got the numbers, if anybody wants to take a look at, it's based upon age of the child. As the child gets older, their expenses become a little more expensive sometimes, so that's laid out that way. One of the things they did this last year, and the legislature wrapped around us with appropriations, with doing this is the adoption subsidies. Some folks don't realize, I guess, that if you adopt a child through the system, and meet certain criteria, most of our children do meet those criteria, and there are federally driven there, but 99% of our children do. You get an adoption subsidy then until that child turns 18 years old. We draw down federal funds for about 60% of that, and state funds pay the remaining percent of that. Federal funds cut off at the 18th birthday currently, but we as a state continue paying until they graduate high school. There is quite a lot of talk about extending those out to age 21, which, we're furthering those children's education or whatever it is that they're doing. That's definitely something. Currently, that period of time, we can't draw $40 for. But something that looks to change even at the federal level too. So,
Question on that. So I have people mention this to me, and then there's a perception that I hear repeated that people do foster parents for the money, quote, for the money. Is that true? If it is even true, to what extent is it not true? And the connotation is that it's there for the money as opposed to making it better for these children.
I think probably the most direct answer, the lawyerly answer to that is it depends, probably. In most cases, I do not think that is the case. I mean, like anything, there may be onesies, twosies out there that are in foster parenting for the wrong reason. They're not really good at math, but if they're doing it for that reason. Because having raised $4 of my own, it costs more than what the subsidy itself is. To give you an idea, I did. For a 0 to 8-year-old, foster board payment rate is $741 currently. That includes clothing allotment, an allowance for the child, all that's incorporated in that period. Again, having raised $4 to adulthood, that don't buy many clothes for a teenage girl per month, right? Or anything else that's needed there. So if they're properly providing and taking care of those kiddos, again, they're very bad at math if they're doing it for that reason, I think. Thank you. Let's see. Got most of it. just to give you an idea of of what it starts saying there, the subsidy, adoption subsidy payments. Nobody can remember the last time they were raised. Board payments have been raised every 2 years, at least during the life cycle of the lawsuit, or at least since the second MSA, which is about 8 years now. But when I tell you nobody in the agency remember the last time the board rates were raised. We did that this last year. It resulted in an average 35% increase in the board payment to those folks. And really what caught our attention with it, and I know the chairs down here heard this, and who both are involved in appropriations too, and they heard as we presented. The case that really brought this to the forefront is we had a single mother teacher who's fostering 3 children and has for over 3 years at that point, and she wanted to adopt them. She couldn't afford to adopt them. At that point, she was not in it for the money, but those 3 children, she was drawing about $2,100 a month in foster board payments to help support those kiddos. If she adopted those 3 children, she was going to drop from $2,100 to $1,200 in an adoption subsidy. She said, I want to adopt them, but I can't. I mean, that doesn't make sense. And, so it really started us looking at it, okay, we're, to a degree, we're artificially keeping children in the foster care program because parents who would like to adopt them can't financially do it. So I think that's, and the intent of the agency is to also keep that aligned on a regular cycle of improvement along with inflation. As inflation goes up, the cost of caring for kiddos does along with it. And, that's a lot of money that we're spending on those adoption subsidies. We also look, in our calculations, if you look across the spectrum, all children in foster care, from a family-based placement to a high-needs acute facility placement that has to be paid for, at up to multiple thousands of dollars a day at the time for some of those children. The average cost to keep a child in foster care is about $35,000 a year. So paying a subsidy is a very small portion of that if we can find that permanency. I mentioned 4E a few minutes ago, and everybody is all about them some 4E money, and we are too. And I will tell you that 4E is a very complicated funding stream. It's probably the most complicated I've seen the federal government figure out how to try to do. It baffles me that whether we're able to use 4E to pay for a child in foster care depends upon the income of the parents from which we took said child. We're still waiting for someone to explain to me that piece. And it's based upon we took the child away from them. Their income is now zero, but children, child income. But anyway, there's some things there with the Family Nurse Prevention Services Act, FFPSA, passed 5 years ago. The state submitted our FFPSA plan this year. Has not been approved yet, but it has finally been submitted. And we're in the back and forth that always occurs with the Children's Bureau in getting that done. Once that gets done, it's going to open up so much more for upstream prevention money that is not tied to the eligibility of the child. But currently, everything's tied to the eligibility of the child. But to give you an idea, we have increased that rate. Currently, it's called the penetration rate, the number of children, out of the number of children in custody, how many of them are eligible. And currently, we are at 42%. So anything that is 4E eligible, you first have to apply the penetration rate to. So if I wanted to spend $100, and it's a 4E administrative, which is at 50% rate, I want to spend $100, I first have to apply the 42% penetration rate. So that drops it to $42, and then I can get 50% of that. So I can draw down 21 federal dollars for that child at that point. That rate historically, going back to, before the agency begun to split DHS, was in the low 20% range. It has taken tremendous efforts over a number of years. Last administration into our administration and the agencies to start this eking up. And that's huge when it comes to our neighboring states. About the highest around us is normally Arkansas, and they come in right around the high 40s to right around 50%. So we're headed. We virtually doubled where it was to there. And what that means is in federal dollars, each percentage increase in that penetration rate falls in the neighborhood of somewhere around $700,000 to $800,000 in federal dollars. So it's huge as we move forward there. So a lot of opportunities for 40, especially with FFPSA, as we increase the penetration rate. There's some training that's actually 40 approved at 75%, and not just for employees, but also there's some that applies to attorneys, certain things there. And so some of those questions as we go through the task force, there's definitely some opportunity there to gain some more funds. Part of that was driven by, and I know this sounds crazy, and everybody says, yeah, you just want it to be split from DHS, and I won't argue that. But the cost allocation plan that the agency was under as part of an overall human services plan severely limited what we were able to draw down in 4E. We officially split July 1 of this year, so 3 weeks ago, roughly, just over. Our cost allocation plan as a standalone agency was submitted on 7/1 with the documentation, with the legislation to the feds, and it integrates all the things that many of us have talked about with, I know Sam and I, we've had a lot of conversations with OSPD, there's been a lot of conversations with AG, there's been a lot of conversations, and what we have submitted and are awaiting on federal approval now is going to allow us to leverage more $40 from the state, which is going to be huge for everybody involved in taking care of the kiddos. And Madam Chairwoman, I think you told Shannon Warnock about 20 to 30 minutes, and I've probably gone way longer than that, so maybe, Dad, along with volunteering Andrew, will be the secretary. May or may not see anybody again. But I would like to wrap up just from the agency's perspective, two things that I think are super important that we address as a task force. And some of these overlap to some other things that are going on. One of them, Chairman Wiggins mentioned earlier, talking about moving those kids through permanency. And on that adoption side, I think everybody's familiar with that process. It isn't designed to be fast right now the way that it's laid out, right? I mean, that's a very good way of saying it, right? It's not designed to be fast. Depending on what type of court you have, whether a county court or a referee court, some cases, the chancellor himself hears it in a couple of counties. You have potential 3 different judges involved in at least 2 different actions, because TPR is a separate action from everything well, up through TPR in the county court can be one action, because a county court, youth court judge can hear that TPR and grant, but then it still has to go to the chancery in another cause of action for the adoption to be done. So at a minimum, there's 2 separate causes of action and potentially 3 different judges hearing that. So that's 3 different dockets. That's 3, and not that anybody is trying to slow the process down. That just inherently is not designed to be fast, right? So I think that is an area, and there's a whole other task force too. I know it's established. And that's, a whole different ballgame, but certainly some things that could come out of this task force that could be used in that task force, and other legislation to possibly streamline that piece of the process.
Question on that. So, is it fair to say or safe to say that you get differing differing results depending on where you are in the state? I see heads nodding. And to move them through the system, and is it safe to say that part and parcel of that is because you have differences of opinion coming from different judges who see things differently, and so you may be on the coast and they go through the permanency, I don't know, in a year, and you go to another part with the same facts and you go through and it takes 2 years. I mean, is that fair to say that's going on?
Yes, sir. That's certainly not a misrepresentation.
Okay. And I'm not asking you to put anybody on the spot, but is that from an interpretation, misinterpretation, or political leanings, or what, depending on where you are? Not you, but what part of the state, or which court system, or whatever.
Is yes, sir, the valid answer?
Okay. It is.
And it's not, I know some, I've heard some say that, well, it's completely different in a county court, youth court, and a referee court. Well, yes, but not necessarily because of the difference of those two people's appointments necessarily, right? I mean, there's some county court judges, or there's some referees that move some actions absolutely as fast as some county court judges do. And, and they do it sometimes with less staff, sometimes the chancery covers down on them. And, in some of the jurisdictions, some of the referee jurisdictions specifically, they don't hold court that often, right? So, I mean, that in itself slows itself down.
Which has been part of the proposal for a statewide youth court system, that you would have a consistent court meetings and not that.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's not throwing stones at any judge or type judge. I mean, because there are some referees that hold court very, very judiciously, very regularly, even though it's part-time job for them. It's just standardizing it is what has to happen.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would assume that when you're dealing statewide with, let's just say, 82 counties, that's very hard on CPS, not to mention everything else. So I see heads nodding on that. But when we look at the children, is that fair, just on a basic level, to the child in, I'm just making something up, in North Mississippi, who it takes 2.5 years to get through, with everything equal, and down on the coast it's taken a year? Is that fair to that child is in that system in the system for another year and a half just because, you know, somebody somewhere, either the court didn't meet, you know, they had a different interpretation of whatever the statute is. Is that fair?
I think that is an excellent way of phrasing it, is to me that everything needs to come back to that kiddo. And regardless of what type of judge, or what part of the state, or what political affiliations, or anything else, I think the way that you said it there, it boils down to, are we taking care of that kiddo the best that we could as a state? And that falls, you know, we absolutely, the agency is a huge piece of that. And we've got our own shop to clean up in many areas that we're working on.
Yeah, but
it should be the same no matter where they are in the state, absolutely.
But I'll say it, but you're dealing with 82 different counties, with multiple jurisdictions, with multiple things, which makes your job that much harder when your job is to move these kids. So, Madam Chair, I could go on about this. I think I would like this task force to include this in whichever committee. I think it certainly falls under whichever issues, and
Oh, it does,
we could explore it. I won't take the time here. But
Absolutely, and that's why I wanted to bring that up as one of the issues from an agency perspective that I think we need to address the recommendations as a task force. The other is on the foster care side. And where we struggle the most on the foster care side, and this isn't just a Mississippi thing, it is a nationwide problem. And that is adequate, the right placement for children. We have, and what I mean by that is a lot of more rural states suffer from this than some others, but across the board is the issue. The level of care that is available across the state is not sufficient for the level of care that is needed of the children that we have in custody. And what I mean by that is we have some great acute care providers in the state. We have some fantastic therapeutic foster homes and group foster homes, some of which people sitting around this table are part of, right? What seems to be absent in Mississippi is, for lack of a better term, some of y'all have heard Andrew refer to it as a subacute kind of level, for lack of a better term. It's that longer-term residential place that a child needs some intensive therapy. I mean, and you can't do that in 14 days in the acute facility. And it does no good when a child goes to this acute facility for 14 days and gets discharged, and then goes to this one for 14 days, and then goes to this one for 14 days. And then we try a therapeutic group home that then blows up not only that child's placement, but several others sometimes, because there's a small group in the grand scheme. There's a small group of children that there's not a place currently in the state for us to put those children. And I mean, we currently have 17 contracts with out-of-state placement providers. And several of those youth villages right across the line in Memphis. I know several of the providers are familiar with some of the programs they have up there, because they do have that longer term, for lack of a better term, the subacute therapy type. We've got several children placed there. We've got 17 different contracts, again, some of them multiple children, that we have somewhere other than Mississippi, because either there was not a place in Mississippi that could provide the treatment, or that would provide the treatment. One of those two elements, right? So, and we want to be completely forthright. We don't know how to fix that problem, because it's a state problem. It's not a CPS problem. It's a statewide problem. It's a product of behavioral health, largely. That's not to say that it's Wendy's problem and behavioral health, again, because that's just one piece of it too. The pandemic certainly didn't help things, with kiddos or adults, but this has been a problem that has been ongoing for a while. It probably, in my opinion, has just exacerbated that problem.
Deputy Commissioner Blanton, thank you. I'm going to open it up because there may be some other task force members who have questions, and definitely we want to recognize again the members of the task force who are participating remotely. They may have questions. So I know we've been asking questions as you've presented, but are there any additional task force members at this time who have any questions?
I have one. Vicki and I have been working a lot for parent attorneys. Given that we're looking at 2 to 3 judges and at least 2 court actions, would parent attorneys help expedite that process?
Look around, see how the judges are nodding. From an agency perspective, I would tell you absolutely yes. I mean, I don't know how it would hurt it anyway. As a direct representative of that child, as a non-lawyer, even I understand that attorneys in the courtroom do move proceedings along, right? I mean,
To follow up on that, if I could ask a question.
Sure.
It's 2 questions. In the legislation you guys passed this year, the youth now have representation. They're supposed to be summoned. They're supposed to have legal counsel. I know of a youth this week that was not allowed. He's 20. He was not in the courtroom for his case. So how do we make things happen once they're in law? And then, I'm probably going to make somebody mad, but the guardian ad litem position, every one of my youth has never met their guardian ad litem. They've never had a conversation. And so I don't understand how they're representing best interest if they aren't talking to the parties and if they're not talking to the youth at all, the parents. I mean, like, that position should be talking to all of the parties, not just showing up for court. And that's one of the biggest things from the youth perspective and from the lived experience is just a lack of voice. And so I do commend everybody on passing that legislation where the youth now have standing and undivided loyalty representation, but making sure it's happening is one thing. And then, making sure that there's capacity for the caseworkers and the foster parents to get these kids to court. Transportation to court is a huge issue. So
I will say that I have both a parent attorney on staff and a guardian ad litem on staff. And if the question was put to me, I would say we need a unified youth court system in Mississippi with parent attorneys and with guardian ad litems on staff full-time. That works for us. And I agree with you.
I will add this from the legislative perspective and the perspective of serving on the judiciary. The legislature, we pass laws. The enforcement of the laws fall to other branches or whatever. And what you just said is not the first time that I've heard that y'all passed a law, well, and it's not being followed or acted on. With present company excluded in that situation, a lot of it falls to the judges. And I love judges, but it goes back to what I was saying. Things are done differently in different parts of the state. My only answer to that is maybe it's getting before the Judges Association to educate them on the laws that have been passed. Because I do think at the end of the day, that's what they're going to do. A lot of it is just they have a lot more on their plates, they don't know, and things are moving fast. But that's not, your point to me is, I think where the rubber meets the road at times. We hear it, we pass it, because it needs to be done. It's the implementation side that we get frustrated with, particularly in the legal system, because I've heard it in different situations. Maybe our judges would have a perspective on that. I mean, and I'm sure the judges here certainly follow that, but it's an issue. Justice Bean? Sorry.
All I would say is that certainly in our Children's Justice Commission, one purpose of that is to try to address these things. So, are you on that? Okay. Well, perhaps we need to add you to that for that voice. But now that I know it, I'm kind of charged with the knowledge of it, so I was certainly volunteering.
And I will say, we have created communication where we will be educating the foster youth of their rights to this so that they can advocate for themselves as well.
Well, and let me say too, it shouldn't just fall on the judges, it's attorneys too. I mean, we just had the bar meeting that many were there, and I don't recall having seen CLE on, or in a section on that. And that's something, and the attorneys who represent, be it guardian ad litem or whatever, are the ones who bring it to the attentions of the judges who will do that. So I think part of this may be an education, but also getting to the various attorneys to do that.
I think we all share some responsibility in it, quite honestly. And I will say this, Council and I were just looking at this. The section that you're referencing is actually in Section 1, and the effective date wasn't until July 1st. I'm not using that as an excuse, but what I am saying is that it may take a little bit of time for the practice to actually catch up with what we have in the law. Definitely the intent is there, and Chairman Wiggins and I have had this conversation, and I've had this conversation with CPS as well. We do need some form of uniform system because you are unfortunately getting different results depending on which part of the state that you are in. And so I'm glad that you raised that point. I've written those two down. We've had a lot of conversations about guardian ad litems, lots, and trying to determine where we go from here. And I'm glad that you brought this up as an issue and a concern because it's actually one of the listed numerical concerns for the task force as well. So we're going to be looking for your input, and I'm not sure if you're on that particular subcommittee. We're going to get to that in a few minutes. But guardian ad litems definitely, representatives definitely, is so important, which is why we have it in this legislation. But again, like I said, it just may take some time. And by you bringing it up, other parents who are in the process bringing it up and highlighting attention, the more lights that shed on it, the more we can come to a resolution on it.
And just a point to address what I have required CPS to do is to bring the children to court where my guardian ad litem has an office. And they do that before the shelter hearing if it's possible. If it's not possible, I require it before the adjudication hearing. So my guardian ad litem meets with every single child before we go to adjudication, at least, but preferably before the shelter. Just to address that specifically.
The phrase that is used for children in this situation and parents is nothing about us without us. So the child, it shouldn't be about the child without the child being present and having their voice heard.
Especially older youth, because you can make a plan all day, but they know how to disrupt it if they're not part of it. Mm-hmm. They'll tear it up.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, yeah. So.
Well, are there any further questions or comments for? Sure.
I'm so
go
sorry.
ahead.
The other thing, back to what David was saying, with the prevention screening and those 4 $8, right now 70% of our youth in custody are because of neglect, and most of that is honestly poverty, not willful neglect, not parents actively hurting their children. And so hopefully with the prevention programming, we'll see far less children in the program that don't belong, because many of our youth will tell you, my parents loved me, they just couldn't afford me.
I saw that.
And so I do think that needs to just be brought up with what you were saying you're doing should really reduce the numbers coming in. So.
I do have two questions. One is, are there any dollars that will be allocated to,
It's definitely
It's
not
our
Wilson.
Wilson's, but
Yeah.
there are, you have a lot of.
I'll be honest, that the programs that we've written into the FFPSA plan, are specifically for addiction recovery. I believe, I know some of, one of the evidence-based programs, Intercept, that's coming into the state, has some modules that do address that, but that's a very good, that is very needed.
well, actually, many times with parents do want help, there's no resources available, and resources that are available, they don't have insurance, and then they're on like 6-month waiting list to go to Whitfield, so by the time they get in place, they're going to. I mean, it's just. Right, and that's right, too, I mean, there's.
The judges extend the
Dollars
plan to give them
dedicated to it.
And there are specific evidence-based programs in the Family First Clearinghouse that address addiction and recovery as well. And that's one we can look at. The beauty of that is we then need a provider to provide it across the state. But as we're talking to other folks, other providers, is to look at those programs that are already on that clearinghouse because they're already approved for 4E drawdown, meaning we can draw down those federal dollars to directly pay for it. And again, the prevention side is no eligibility requirements. So for up to 12 months, we can draw down that money for that child. And it can be renewed after 12 months under certain circumstances.
I'm sorry, I have one more question. The second question was, with respect to durable legal custody, what is the agency's position on that now as a viable option in lieu of TPR?
We support it. The issue that we have, issue's the wrong word, I guess. This is one of those system issues that we're trying to work through. Is the ability to pay a subsidy payment to those parents as well. Those normally, in most cases, with jail, but not all cases. Legislation is there now to do it. And in the appropriation bill, we were authorized to pay kinship payment in this last time around. Where we're at now is honestly working through the system issue for us to be able to issue said payment, to process that payment for those children. Because that is a very viable option. And any, especially, Sam talking about the older kiddos, a lot of times, they don't want to be adopted, right? But they would agree and as she put, maybe not blow up a placement in legal custody type arrangement. That provides them some permanency without surrogate for the parent. And many of them will support that, I think. And we know, perhaps in fact, in talking to some judges, there are numbers out there that aren't moving forward with durable legal custody because of that same financial impact of losing that because they can't afford to do it. They want to do it, they can't afford to do it, just like the adoption subsidy.
To piggyback on-
Right?
As David was saying, a lot of our youth don't want to be adopted. They don't want to tell their mom they're changing their name and they don't, and once they get out of custody, they're going to need those relationships. They may not have been perfect, but they're going to need those relationships because we're gone. Everybody at this table is out of their lives. So,
Are there any further questions? Seeing none, I want to, and let me make sure there are no questions from our task force members participating remotely. All right, seeing no additional questions, we want to thank Deputy Commissioner Blanton for your very thorough overview of foster care and adoptions in the state of Mississippi. I want to just say thank you. As I sat and I listened to you give the numbers, I want to say thank you to Commissioner Sanders. I know she's not here. Thank you to you and the entire team at CPS for all that you do for our children that are in your custody, for your work in screenings, for making sure that we have licensure for our foster homes. Also want to thank all of our foster parents that are in the state and those parents that eventually adopt. During your testimony, Chairman Wiggins and I were talking about the payments as we listened to you about the payments and just wanting to ensure again that we make this process as fluid as possible while also maintaining that or making sure that we're providing for the safety and welfare of the children that are in your custody. And so I think your testimony and the presentation that you made today provides a great overview and an overarching framework and a foundation, a very solid foundation, I would say, based on the numbers that you gave us as to how we move forward. And so that leads us to our next item on the agenda. Our goal is to have you out by 3. So No, it was needed. And you can tell based on the engagement, the level of engagement from the members of the task force, how important this is. So thank you. Let's segue into the goals of the committee. So you have before you what Chairman Wiggins provided to you, which were the duties from Senate Bill 2384. And we previously discussed that we have to have a report by December 1st of 2023. So that is one of our goals. Chairman Wiggins, and there has been some discussion among the task force. I know Judge Dickinson talked about this. He hinted on this a few minutes ago about having a uniform county court system. And so in our bill, it's going to be letter O. It says that the task force can look into any other issues related to the Mississippi foster care system or adoption that the task force finds appropriate to address. And I know Chairman Wiggins asked that that be made one of the issues or concerns that the task force addresses. I think it's appropriate and it falls under our catch-all O, which is in the legislation. So without any objection from the committee, we will add that as one of our duties. And I'm going to just ask for unanimous consent. So moved?
So moved.
Okay. All in favor? Yes? Aye. So it's unanimous. So Chairman Wiggins, that now becomes, you're welcome, that now becomes one of our duties for our task force on foster care and adoption. You have before you, and we have several areas in our Senate bill that we're tasked to review. I prepared a subcommittee list and divided them into areas of concern. So subcommittee number 1 is Justice Don Beam as the chair. And then we have the members of that subcommittee that are listed below. And for members who are participating remotely, you should have this information, or if for the purpose of those who may be watching this video later who may not have the subcommittee list before them, I'll just go through it very quickly. We have also a member of Subcommittee 1, Dana Baumgartner, Hadley Gable, Jamie Himes, and Samantha Callahar. The areas of concern for Subcommittee number 1 are listed below it. Reviewing the timeframes and guidelines followed once a child comes into Child Protection Services custody, and how to balance the length of these timeframes, the best interest of the child, and the interest of the biological parent. Review the requirements to have concurrent permanency plans, whether this is currently taking place. If so, whether it's effective. If it's not effective, what do we need to do to ensure the courts and CPS are pursuing concurrent plans? Number 3, review the requirements for psychological assessments or evaluations for each child coming into custody. Is this necessary for every case? And if so, how do we address the major shortage of medical providers that will be able to provide the services? Number 4, review of the diagnostic and evaluation shelters. Is this number sufficient? Whether children are staying in these facilities too long before placement. Subcommittee number 2, the chair is Judge Joseph Kilgore. And the subcommittee members, Judge Crystal Wise Martin, Allison McMinn, Jennifer Morgan, I have Allison listed twice. And then 5, we're going to have our Commissioner Andrea Sanders. Areas of concentration for subcommittee number 2, perform a comprehensive review and draft any necessary proposed revision of adoption statute. Review the use of reasonable efforts and diligent search in the Child Protection Services statutes. Determine whether a uniform definition is needed for each term, and if so, to draft recommended language. Number 3, draft the definition or examples through a non-exhaustive list of what constitutes compelling and extraordinary reasons why termination of parental rights would not be in the best interest of the child. Number 4, draft definitions of neglect as willful or non-willful with a proposal for different courses of action depending on the type of neglect. Subcommittee number 3, Judge Cheryl K. Pierce is the chair, and these are the subcommittee members: David Calder, Judge Mike Dickinson, Jennifer Sebrin, Ruth Wilder, and Lindsay Simmons. The areas of concentration for subcommittee number 3, review of guardian ad litem role in the foster care system and termination of parental rights process, including the proper responsibility for payment of guardians ad litem, how much they should be paid, whether more guardians ad litem are needed, and whether Title IV funds can be used for that purpose. Review whether parent representatives should be provided, and if so, how to pay them, and whether Title IV funds could be used to pay them. Review of Title E funding, whether these funds are being legally maximized, how they are being used, and whether there are changes that need to be made to get the most out of these federal funds. And then number 4, to review the Fatherhood Initiative proposals and develop proposed policies to increase fatherhood participation of absent fathers. We'll also add, and this is not on your list, we're going to form, based on the motion and vote, unanimous vote that was taken, to add the uniform county court system. We're going to form a subcommittee number 4, and Chairman Wiggins and I will chair that committee. And are there any task force members that would like to serve on this committee? All right, we got Justice Beam.
Judge Dickinson,
General's office.
General's office.
OSPD.
Okay.
Crystal Wise Martin.
Joseph Martin.
That's going to be a committee of the whole.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It looks like it's going to be a committee of the whole. So, let's do that.
Yeah, we can either add it, or it can be a separate subcommittee with everybody on it.
I think it needs to be a separate subcommittee. And so we'll just add all of the task force members to this particular subcommittee that we have that strictly deals with this issue. I think it needs to be separate, though.
Being whatever chair or however you want to do that. Or I guess you said both of us.
We'll both be. We'll both be.
Ad hoc committee. How's that?
Works for me. All right, so are there any other goals? I'm going to open the floor just to see, are there any other goals, any other issues that we need to address?
I was just wondering, some of this that is on the list
specialized expertise in our state when you're talking about mental health issues and long-term care. Is it okay if we bring others into that meeting to help us with these recommendations?
Well, I think that is a good question, and what I would like to see, hopefully, is that the subcommittees, I know based on the members that we have, you're actually going to work. You're actually going to get in and do the hard work that needs to be done, is that we have, and this will segue into our next bullet point on the agenda, which is meeting times, places, other presenters, etc. I think it would be helpful, just as a suggestion, if the subcommittees met on your particular issues, we're gonna have, if our goal is to have a report by December 1st, I would imagine by our our November meeting, we probably need to be finalizing what our recommendations are to prepare for that December report. And if this is July, starting in August, we could have our first meeting with whatever subcommittee wants to present first. And within that subcommittee, take for instance Justice being your subcommittee, you and your committee members decide what witnesses or what presentations the committee as a whole would need to hear based on the areas of concern that have been allotted to your subcommittee. I do think that it's helpful. You're right. You're going to need some mental health consultation. And I thought about that yesterday, actually, as I was looking at what the duties are. There are some other issues that deal with drug abuse, etc. So we're going to have some mental health medical expertise that's lent to the task force. So I think that that's going to be extremely helpful. But the subcommittee members, you're going to have to find and identify. Chairman Wiggins and I are here to help. We've got Peer that's a part of this committee, and Peer is a valuable resource. We have the Judicial College, which is also in the legislation, that is a valuable resource as well. But I think you're directly on point. You're going to have in some of these areas some specialized contribution, I would say, to help us be able to make a recommendation.
Can I clarify or so that understand? I think those committees or subcommittees are really good, but the subcommittees, if they so choose, let's say it's mental health, the subcommittees can go ahead and bring in or hear from whoever they feel is appropriate, necessary, and then when we gather again, the subcommittee can report to us. Is that kind of where we're headed?
For the members of the committee who, well, let's form it in a question. How many of the subcommittee members actually want to hear? Would you prefer to have the report and have the subcommittee members just say, okay, we're going to go ahead and meet with the mental health expert? Or do you want the subcommittee to identify and then have that person to come and hear the presentation? I was thinking that the subcommittee chair, the subcommittee members would actually identify who they want to present on their areas of concern. And then just as Commissioner Blanton did this afternoon, come and say, okay, we're going to have these presenters, and based on our meeting, and this is what we feel are the relevant points or relevant facts that the committee needs to hear as a whole.
Yeah, I think we're seeing it too. I can do it either way.
Could it be a hybrid where the subcommittee actually met with the, for instance, medical professional beforehand and maybe help to streamline some issues, but that medical professional would also be asked to come and speak before the entire body?
That's what I was.
We're saying the same thing.
Okay. Okay.
I know that a lot of work has been done, particularly on the mental health area, as a subcommittee of the Children's Justice Commission. So I don't want to waste time. I want to maximize the time
True.
we're all together. So
True.
I just wanted some direction.
No need to reinvent the wheel, and if like the Children's Justice Commission has already done all these things, then to Angela's point, the committee says, hey, this is who's doing it, they can come and talk to us, or that kind of thing. Yeah, or we can hear from them, do that, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Is that accurate?
That is.
Okay.
We're all saying the same thing. We want to maximize the time. And so, just as Judge Crystal Wise Martin said, when you and the subcommittee are meeting, if you determine, okay, this particular doctor is fluid and then is expert in this particular area, the subcommittee meets, determines this is who we want, then you've already pretty much streamlined the process for us by the time it gets to 113.
And by the way, I want to reiterate what Angela said here, and Mississippi Judicial College are at our disposal. So don't be afraid to use them. And then the subcommittees can be done by Zoom or by email if that's what the chair chooses, instead of in person.
And if we need to help facilitate any of that, please let us know. All right, so what about our meeting times and dates?
Madam Chair, considering the time and having kind of been on one or two of these before, I think maybe at two more meetings, and you mentioned the November to prepare for that. So I certainly think at least two more meetings of this task force in person to do that, and probably no more than everybody's busy, time limited, no more than even 4, I would say, or 5. So I guess where I'm going with it is this being, well, we're almost to August, so really like August and October and November, something like that.
What about September?
Okay, so we could do that if you did once a month till November when we put that in place. I think it would be optimum and get on everybody's schedule, and we would know what it is.
I think that's a good plan. If we did August, September, October, that gives us 3 meetings. It gives us plenty of time. We don't feel rushed. Obviously, we maximize the time and make sure that we're using it efficiently. Hence, the workings of the subcommittee are going to be extremely vital so that when we come in the meeting, we're rocking and rolling. So August, September, October, I think that's a good idea to have those 3 meeting months. And then in November, we can finalize any recommendations that we have.
I think Tuesday, what's today, Tuesday? Tuesdays like this is a good time. I will speak for myself and probably Judge Dickinson. Driving, it helps when you, in the afternoon when you have to drive. So time being 1 o'clock on Tuesday.
Agree. Afternoons would be better for judges and those who appear in court, because our dockets are set several months ahead of time, so we have to.
So 1 o'clock, Tuesday at 1. And I'm looking at my calendar.
The 3rd.
We're talking about August?
Yes, starting in the month of August.
I will say CPS has a policy work group on the 29th already that will have a lot of people from this table at that. So that date, just throwing that out there.
May I suggest, so considering Tuesday the 8th is primary day, so maybe the 15th and then go from there. So that would be that's the 3rd Tuesday of the month.
There is an Access to Justice meeting on the 15th that I know a couple of us are on now.
That would be in that morning though, right?
Usually, I think they serve lunch and
So 1 o'clock, we could do 1 o'clock, right?
probably do 1:30.
What about 1 o'clock? August the 15th. Does that day work for everyone? August the 15th at 1? And we want to make sure, and Chairman Wiggins and I discussed this previously, we'd like to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to voice their concerns or opinions. So I would just ask, and we're going to do the same thing, Chairman Wiggins and I, to make sure that we are going from north, south, east to west to make sure every region of the state is covered, every organization that does want some input, that they have it, because the last thing that we would want, whether as a task force or either Chairman Wiggins and I, as Chair of Judiciary A, once session starts, for someone to say, well, we didn't have any input and we wanted input. So I'm saying this so that everyone can hear, including those who may be watching this video later. If you want to have input about any of these areas or have some information that you'd want the task force to consider, please don't hesitate to submit it to us. All right, with that being said, final comments. Are there any? Seeing none, we'd just like to say thank you again. We look forward to seeing everybody on August the 15th. And Chairman Wiggins and I will be communicating via email with the members of the subcommittee, which include the subcommittee members, especially the chairman. And we look forward to seeing you on the 15th. To our members participating remotely, thank you.
Rise and report.
There is a motion that we rise and report. All those in favor say aye.
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 Good job.
Things are going.
I think great, going great. I'm going to send you an email. Your subcommittee has to.
And that's, it may just, that's the, whatever, the third Tuesday, so